Chapter 1. Under the Sky of Assur. In the heart of the city of Assur, on the banks of the Tigris River, stood the palace of King Samas, a man of imposing stature, with dark eyes that seemed to see beyond the natural earthly. Ruler of the northern region of Mesopotamia, he bore the title of Assur, governor anointed by the gods, guardian of the laws and sacred rites. His palace, built of sun-baked bricks, with high gates and alabaster sculptures depicting winged bulls, was more than a residence. It was a center of power, mystery and destiny. In the shadow of the throne sat his queen, Ninlil, a woman of cold elegance and an iron will. Her name meant Lady of Ninlil, the goddess of the winds, and no one dared to look her directly in the eye without permission. Although the sources have not preserved her memory according to official chronicles, her presence was felt in every corner of the palace, in the scent of incense in the sacred rooms, in the fine textiles that adorned the salons, and in the respectful silence with which the women of the court spoke her name. And the south wing of the palace, Queen Ninlil led her own court. There, the sound of fabrics woven on wooden looms intertwined with the murmur of prayers whispered by priestesses, and the bronze bells on the girdles of the maids brought the echo of a secret order. Each room had a purpose, one for prayers to the goddess Ishtar, another for storing gold and lapis lazuli jewelry, yet another for secret meetings with religious emissaries or women from allied nations. In this closed and hierarchical world, the queen was the master of all. The women around her, secondary wives, concubines brought through political alliances, royal sisters with ranks priestesses, guardians of children and devoted servants, they formed a feminine universe in which silence, loyalty and subtlety were worth more than big words. Some supervised the granaries and weaving workshops, others administered the royal estates or prepared offerings for the gods. Life at the palace pulsed in a sacred rhythm. The passage of the day was marked by the cry of the scribe, who announced the hours of prayer, by the beating of drums during purification ceremonies, and by the songs in the Akkadian language that rose at night, when the queen raised her prayers for the city, family and gods, and this ancient universe, where power was divided between men and gods. Queen Ninlil was the mysterious bridge between the earthly world and the divine will. Behind the cedar gates, decorated with bas-reliefs and cuneiform inscriptions, was what the palace servants respectfully called the House of Women, and no men entered there, except for high-ranking eunuchs, and only at the queen's summons. This was the residence of the chosen women, the secondary wives and concubines brought through political alliances, a silent but vibrant world full of hidden rivalries and fragile loyalties. Each woman who lived there had a name and a story. Some came from allied cities on the banks of the Euphrates, brought as peace offerings, adorned with jewels and promises. Others had been raised in temples and given to the palace by the high priests to strengthen their ties with the gods. All, without the exception, they sought to assert their place in the eyes of King Samas. But above all hovered the absolute authority of Queen Ninlil. The queen did not express her power through shouts or punishments. A look was enough, a silent gesture of the hand, and a woman could be sent into oblivion, to the edge of the palace, to the cold chambers of the common maids. Under her rule, harmony was imposed, and every woman knew that her rank depended not only on noble origin, but also on the respect shown to the queen. Secondary wives wore long dresses of indigo-dyed linen, embroidered with gold thread, but they were not allowed to wear the purple cloak of the mistress of the palace. The younger concubines, often silent and timid, learned the art of court behavior from the most senior in rank, how to walk, be silent, smile without defiance and hide their hopes. In their eyes, the union between King Samas and these women, it was not one of love, but of strategy. Political marriages linked cities and kingdoms. A concubine from Der meant a non-aggression treaty with the south. A daughter of the king of Mari brought to the palace meant rights to a trade route. The children resulting from these unions were raised within the palace, but their education was overseen by the queen, who alone decided which child deserved to be raised in the shadow of the throne. Despite the seemingly placid silence, life within these walls was tinged with suspicion. Each woman was also an ambassador. Sometimes, a smile hid information discreetly delivered to her home city. Other times, a simple touch on the arm could signal a new alliance within the palace. But before the queen, all obeyed. To them, Ninlil was not just the king's wife. She was the guardian of their destiny, the unseen judge who decided who stayed and who was sent. Back in shameful silence, woman might win the king's favor for a night, but without the queen's blessing, she could become nothing more than a shadow among others. Thus was the silent weaving of female power at the court of Assur, not by sword, but by calculated smiles, by unspoken alliances, and by loyalty to the one woman who was never to be asked who she was. The Queen, a name spoken only in whispers. Ninlil. Chapter 2. The Women of the Goddess. Passing through a long vaulted corridor, lined with frescoes depicting ancient myths and sacred rituals, one reached the sacred part of the city, Ika, the temple complex dedicated to Assur and the goddess Ishtar. There, between high brick walls and silent courtyards, lived the priestesses, women chosen not only for their purity, but also for their noble blood, for many were daughters, sisters or cousins of the queen herself. The priestesses wore simple white robes, tied with red woolen belts, a symbol of their connection with the goddess. Their hair was tied with ribbons and silver bells, and their steps never rang on the stone of the temple, for they were taught to walk with the silence of the wind. Their names were not spoken in public, for they served not for glory, but for balance, between the world and the divine. Queen Ninlil had a special connection with these women in her youth. She too had been initiated into the secret rites of the temple of Ishtar, where she had learned to read the signs of dreams, sing sacred hymns in the Sumerian language, and anoint the statues of the gods with mixtures of resin and myrrh. Now, as queen, she patronized the temple, sent monthly gifts, and at least once each season, came accompanied by only a few maids to lock herself away for a whole night in the forbidden room, where only the great initiates were allowed to step. The priestesses were not simple supplicants. They kept the sacred archives, interpreted the will of the gods, supervised the purity of rituals, and took care of teaching the children chosen from among the nobility. Some knew how to write in cuneiform, on tablets of clay, prophecies and dreams sent by the gods. Others divined in oil or in the liver of a sacrificial lamb. The oldest were called Entu, brides of the god, women who had never married, having been given to Assur since birth. Although they lived in the temple, they were under the protection of the queen. No major decision, either in the palace or in the city, was made without first reaching the ears of the priestesses in secret. Then, through unseen channels, their words returned to the queen, guiding her steps like a silent oracle. It is said that the queen herself did not leave the palace without first receiving a dream interpreted by Annabelti, the wisest of them. The relationship between Ninlil and these women was one of mutual respect and fear. The queen had worldly power, lands, jewels, armies of servants. But they had the key to the heavens. Every year, at the summer solstice, the priestesses anointed the queen with sacred oil in a secret ritual, in which the throne, crown and womb of the queen were blessed for fertility and balance in the kingdom. In a world ruled by men, these women, the queen and the priestesses, held in invisible hands what could not be written on tablets. The power invoked in whispers, in blood and in the stars. If the queen was the heart of the palace, then the royal mothers and sisters were its living memory. Heirs of ancient blood ties, bearers of the name of their ancestors, these women did not live in the shadow of the queen, but in a tense balance with her, between respect and rivalry. And the northern part of the palace, in a separate but well-guarded complex, lived the ladies of royal blood, the sisters of King Samus and his mothers, sometimes even grandmothers. Some they bore inherited priestly titles, such as Su-Iltu or Entu, having been temple servants since childhood. Others had once been wives of former kings and now maintained a quiet dignity, covered with heavy veils of damask wool and perfumed with rare oils. The most revered of them was the king's mother, the old Nabu, known for her piercing eyes and vivid memories of the previous era. A former priestess of the Temple of Enlil, she still retained influence, not only over her son, but also over the palace advisors. Although the queen held de facto authority, Nabu was seen as the unofficial matriarch, and her word, rarely spoken, carried weight. The relationship between Ninlil and these women was a complicated one. On the one hand, she recognized their rank and importance, participating in rituals and festivals with them, offering them symbolic gifts and letting them manage some of the palace reserves. On the other hand, the queen knew that at any moment a source of rivalry could arise. A younger and ambitious sister, a mother who regretted that her son had not chosen another wife, or a relative with influence in the temples. To maintain balance, Ninlil used diplomacy, silence and calculated gestures. She sent messengers with rare fruits from the palace gardens, sent fine fabrics for feasts and often asked the opinion of the king's mother before a major event, but not because she needed advice, but to recognize her role and subtly cut into her political momentum. The king's sisters, especially Belti and Ashratum, had both been educated in the temples and had religious titles in public. They accompanied the queen in processions and ceremonies. In private, however, each pursued her own agenda. Belti supported one of the concubines, the king, hoping that his grandson might become heir. Ashratum, in turn, cultivated relationships with the great scribes of the city, trying to build a circle of intellectual and spiritual influence. Despite these simmering tensions, the queen never excluded them. On the contrary, she integrated them into the architecture of power, knowing that a wise queen does not isolate powerful women, but offers them a role visible enough to feel seen, and controlled enough not to become dangerous. Thus, between oaths, rituals and silences, royal blood wove its own games, and Queen Ninlil walked carefully between fragile loyalties and too long smiles. For in a palace where the goddess Ishtar guarded the border between love and war, every woman was a piece in a divine game, and none could be ignored. Chapter 3. Shadows of Loyalty. Under the high domes of the palace of Assur, beyond the stately chambers and solemnly decorated courtyards, pulsed a world hidden from the eyes of the great, the world of the maids and guardians of the royal children. They were women of no rank, no jewels, and no names spoken aloud in the palace councils. And yet, without them, the queen herself would have been more vulnerable than she dared to admit. Dawn. The palace came to life not with the sound of royal footsteps, but with the rustle of linen skirts, the hurried tramp of bare feet, and the coded whispers of the maids. They lit incense, washed the robes, tasted the wine before it was served to the king, and kept their silence like a second skin. Queen Ninlil personally chose her high-ranking maids, those women who accompanied her day and night, in the rest rooms, at bathing, or in sacred rituals. These were not simple servants. They were the eyes and ears of the queen, taught to read expressions, recognize tones of voice, and spot the steps of betrayal before they reached the inner courts. Some of these women came from modest but loyal families. Others were former concubines who had fallen from grace, forgiven, and brought back under a vow of silence. The oldest in service became the guardians of the royal children, wise women of few words and iron eyes, responsible not only for feeding and clothing the children, but also for shaping their character. The guardians of the royal children were, in fact, the first teachers of the future princes and princesses. They taught them to walk, to respect the goddess, to control their anger, and to keep the secrets of the palace. They knew the children's dreams, their fears, and sometimes even the small sins that the queen was not allowed to reveal. But they kept them, if necessary, with the same fidelity with which they kept the amulets hanging around their necks. The relationship of these women with the queen was silent but deep. Ninlil did not speak to them often, but he observed them closely. Servant who lied once was replaced the next day. One who cried silently was called and questioned directly. One who brought news by mistake was punished, but one who brought dangerous news was protected. It was said that the queen wrote the names of her most loyal women on tablets hidden in a clay chest, in a secret room of the palace, which only she and a single guardian could open. On the rare occasions when the queen went out to the city gates to bless the people, the servants accompanied her in an invisible circle, like a living wall of feminine protection. If one of them fell, another took her place without a word. If one betrayed, her disappearance was not announced, but the whole court understood. Through them, Ninlil saw everything, and through them she strengthened her reign. For a strong queen does not rule only over the great and noble, but also over those who whisper between the rafters, who know the hidden paths and who watch over the children in the middle of the night. The day in the royal palace began before the sun caressed the defensive towers, and in Queen Ninlil's room, sleep faded with the song of the maid who lit the first oil lamp. A clay tablet was carefully placed next to the bed, a list of prayers, the tasks of the day, and the names of the women who were to ask for an audience with her. The first hour was one of silence and purification. The queen was washed with rose water, perfumed with cedar resin and dressed in garments chosen according to the position of the planets, as a palace astrologer whispered to her. After sipping a warm drink of dates and milk, she would go to the prayer room where, kneeling before the statue of the goddess Ishtar, she would whisper prayers for balance, for the peace of the palace and for her husband. The morning hours were dedicated to private audiences, priestesses, concubines, officials, sometimes even female emissaries from other cities. The queen listened, asked short questions and established order in the complicated world of her female court.